Well, it's time they got it now. And so I will be working tirelessly for that end. And as I say, non-violently, peacefully, legally and lawfully. And I'm welcome any support, advice, ideas, and please get involved, you know. Right, the next thing I want to mention is, you know, I'm doing this commentary on the Quran, right? And I'm loving it because the Quran is like a huge ocean. You can dive into any surah, any verses, and you come up with jewels. You know, I've been to Dubai and many of these Arab places, and they were often pearl fishing places. They've now grown into great airports. But the idea of the pearl fisher is quite important. And in the Quran, you can dive in and come up with absolute gems. Why? Well, I think Muhammad was plugging into the collective unconscious of humanity. He was plugging into that God realm, where inspiration comes from. The great seers of history, the great Vedic, Buddhistic, you know, Taoistic, all the great sages can plunge into that universal thought world. And Muhammad did for his time and place. You know, the downloads in the Quran are gems of universal wisdom and application. And it's been my pleasure and delight to do this commentary. It's taken me 10 years. You know, I'm doing it alongside everything else. Why bother? Well, look, hang on. There's at least 1 billion Muslims in the world. There are at least a sixth of the world's population. There's more all the time because they love each other and are loving people. And the Muslims are to die for, amazing. I've had many, many friends and students who are Muslims of all shapes, varieties and colours, from Shia and Sunni and Ismaili and Sufi and all the different shades of Islam. You know, the idea that Islam is this one thing, sort of monotheistic, simplistic thing that we have to oppose, is just like as ignorant as saying we're against hydrogen. You know, suddenly all the elements are going to declare war on hydrogen because, well, they're fed up with hydrogen, you know. Well, what would happen? All the water would go, all the air would go, we'd all vanish. You know, declaring war on Islam is about as sensible, because Islam is, in my view, and listen to my commentary on the Quran, is simply that modality of piety and humility confronted with the absolute that every sane human rational soul should adopt. We shouldn't be arrogant, thinking, you know, we know best. I mean, there are sort of demonic personalities that occur in human history who declare war on the absolute. They're going to defeat it. They're going to be better than it. The human ego becomes a ravaging, demonic, possessed, you know, sort of false thing. And in the Quran, that's called the error of Iblis. Iblis is that principle inside the human being that sets itself up against God to out-God God. But you can't. you know, ego cannot defeat God in any of the known strategies of you know, power, wealth, endless sex, endless consumption, endless luxury, endless ownership. Capitalism is a sort of ego project. Have more, you know, get richer, more powerful, etc. It's just, all this is Iblis nonsense, right? The only thing ultimately Iblis has got to do is love, surrender back to the absolute. And at that point, the ego, you know, runs off into the long grass in the sunset and is reabsorbed into the whole. So anyway, Muhammad was obviously a spiritual seer of a very high level, and because I come from a culture that, you know, I wasn't taught this, I had to learn this myself. I read the Quran in my 20s when I studied all world religions and all world philosophical systems, and, you know, subsequently I've taught Islamic studies at university level and at school level, and that's why I began my Quran commentary, because I feel, look, here's something of such splendour, it needs to be better known. What really annoys me is this ridiculous Islamophobia that is now at street level. You know, somebody in London, Ontario, my beloved Canada, gunning down with a van a little family all out walking that just happened to be Muslim. You know, a beautiful little family not doing any harm to anyone. it's absolutely shocking that these kind of people think that's all right. And it's buttressed by the media, which has been pumping out this anti-Islamic stuff ever since 9/11. And I think if you trace it back, 9/11 was a false coup against our intelligence. I've written a 2-volume work about 9/11. It's the 20th anniversary coming up. My friend Richard Gage is making a new film pointing out that the story of the Bush hegemony was false. Tony Blair bought into this and launched their war against Iraq on utterly spurious and deceitful grounds. The only thing it suited was American neocon, fake Zionist strategies. I call it fake Zionist because no true Zionist in the Einstein mode, which I am in, would ever think that launching fake wars against Muslims is a moral thing to do. Now, you'll be A, found out eventually, and B, the revulsion and horror against that will be so bad that it will outweigh any possible benefit. So that's why I've also launched the International Commission for the historical investigation of 9/11. It's simply a factual historical investigation, and I'm the only historian on the planet to have done that. I don't know where all my historical colleagues are, but in September we're going to have the 2nd annual conference, and we'll continue. This one will be the 20th anniversary of the events. It was supposed to take place in The Hague, but because of lockdown, it didn't, and I'm not sure it will this year either. It'll probably be on Zoom again. So anyway, that's my duty as an intellectual, is to join up all these problems. And I think that Islamophobia, the only solution to it is Islamophilia. We have to all fall in love with the highest wisdom that Islam represents, transform from being Islamophobes to Islamophiles. And that means understanding the text. That means reading the Quran in absolute detail and attention, as I've done. Listen to my commentary. It's taken 10 years' work. You will come out of it transformed, because you'll realise the historical background Muhammad was coming from with Khadija, his beloved. And Khadija's role in creating the thought world that made the Quran possible is really important. And also Ali and the circle that became the first Muslims. Anyway, I've looked at all this. It's the most intensive and complicated and comprehensive commentary on the Quran ever attempted in a European language, and by someone with contemporary scholarship and historical skills. Anyway, I'm going to read a little quote out about this. Let me just share with you one of the passages that I've been commenting on recently, because they are so interesting, and I just want to share a little glimpse. So I've been working on Surah 45, and it's really fascinating. And it's one of the constant themes recurring in the Quran is what are called signs. That's the term in Arabic is Ayat. And one is constantly reminded in the Quran that God is sending signs to us all the time. Ha-mim. The revelation of the book is from God, the exalted in power, full of wisdom. Verily, in the heavens and the earth are signs for those who believe. Now, what does it mean? What are these ayat? And he goes on to say, okay, animals, that's an ayat. Night and day, that's an ayat. Winds, that's an ayat. In other words, in nature, in biology, in cosmology, in physics, in meteorology, in other words, in all the manifestations of nature, there are signs of something at work. And what it points to, in my commentary, I explain this in great detail. is a divine intelligence underlying the operations of nature. Now, this is what conventional scientists won't accept. Conventional Darwinian-trained reductionist scientists who have the stranglehold in Western academia. Now, the minute you talk about divine intelligence, they shut the books and leave the room. But that's the point at which a true Muslim, a true scholar, a true spiritual sage, a true Christian scholar or Jewish scholar would say, well, now this conversation is getting interesting. You know, how does the cell or the egg show signs of divine intelligence? How is that possible? Can we design experiments for this? That's why I created the Centre for the Study of Divine Intelligence when I lived in the castle in Scotland. It's a live project. And I've written a whole book on the nature of the egg, because I think the egg is so fundamental to biological existence, both for humans and all other animals, that if we can, and plants, they have eggs too, if we can understand what an egg is and how it came into being, how it evolved, how it works, you know, and because it's obviously the interface, the egg is the interface between the spiritual soul being and the incarnational vehicle, how it comes into form. So anyway, to me, you know, I'm working on the signs and trying to understand them. Then verse 6 says, such are the signs of God, which we rehearse to thee in truth. Then in what exposition will they believe after rejecting God and his signs? You know, these debates were going on in Mecca at the time of Muhammad. People were saying to him, no, you're possessed, you're just channeling stuff you picked up in the marketplaces, you don't know what you're talking about. You know, there is no God. There's only custom. Yeah, there's our little idols, there's Hunbal, and just worship that, you know, just don't rock the boat, Muhammad. You don't know enough. Well, that's what they're still saying, effectively. All over the planet, you know, there are the old guard still saying, don't ask these questions, don't talk about divine intelligence, just get your PhD in microbiology and shut up and do what everyone else does. You know, don't ask the bigger picture questions, because academia nowadays there's less and less space to ask the bigger picture questions. You're not allowed to ask theological questions about biology. God, you get chucked out. Nobody would publish you. You know, so there's sort of fear of group thinking. It's the opposite of herd immunity. It's sort of, well, it's a kind of herd immunity to intelligence. It's a herd instinct for ignorance. Look, I'm not ignorant. I'm not ignoring. I'm just doing what everyone else does. We're all ignoring, you know. And I know from teaching religious studies in university and schools how people hate religion in secular Western capitalist society. It's regarded as you know, the cause of all the troubles, rather than the cure of all the troubles, which is what I believe it is, having gone into it in enough depth. Anyway, so yes, so this verse is simply saying, well, what are you going to believe in? What's your narrative? If you reject the divine intelligence behind manifestation, you know, what narrative will you put in its place? And the answer is there isn't one. There won't be a narrative, because there can't be. What there is a silencing and a closure of discourse. Now, this is why I've supported Jung's work for many years, and why I wrote his ideas into my PhD thesis as a historian, because having studied history for 20 years, and at university level and doing a PhD, I came to the view that there are signs also in history. History unfolds these signs, these ayat. And it's our duty as historians to see, you know, the writing on the wall as civilizations come and go. And that's why we study the past, that's why we study history. So I can see the hubris behind Brexit as a historian, just as much as if I was Herodotus wandering again in 20th century Europe. You know, he would his scathingness, of Brexit would be just classic, you know. So, and Jung's idea of synchronicities, those are one of the signs, again, that you will know from your spiritual journey. As you become more spiritually awakened, you see these synchronicities more. They're like divine signs behind the scenes that actually you're on stage, these are props, and that the real director of affairs is some kind of divine intelligence behind us that we can't see. We have to, as Plato said, sort of turn around and, get out into the sunlight in his famous image in the Republic. So anyway, that's all been going on. I've been doing my work on the Quran, which is going really well. You can listen to that on my Green University website. And it's, as I say, the most comprehensive ever attempt to do such a commentary. And I think I'm doing it on behalf of all the billion Muslims of the planet, and also all the non-Muslims, because I want non-Muslims to realise what a treasure this is. Needn't be a cause to war, to celebrate this. And Muslims themselves to realise what a treasure it is as well. And how it can be synchronised with Western scientific thinking. It's not that you need to attack Western intellectuals and scientists. There can be a peace possible. So the whole project is a peace project. You also get the same idea of signs in St. John and the Gospels. John is saying that Jesus is going around doing signs always. So when he does a miracle, like water into wine, it's not in and of itself just as a miracle. It's like a sort of showman saying, look at me, I can turn water into wine. No, it has a deeper meaning. It has a sort of ethical depth. In that case, it's about taking stuff that is from one level of being and transmuting it into another level of being. So working with your inner alchemy of emotions and fears and grief and all the rest, and turning that into something pure and cosmic and ecstatic. That's the alchemy of turning the water into wine. Now that's one interpretation, but those are the Ayat according to John. And again, it's the divine intelligence behind that is working through Jesus to manifest these signs. So in my commentary on the Quran, the commentary is such that a Muslim can read it and love it, a Christian can read it and love it, a Jew can read it and love it, and a pagan, a druid, a primal person, or Buddhist, and even a scientific, secular type person will get something from it. So it's designed, the commentary is designed in a way that is truly universal in scope. And that's why I've also brought into it my work on religious mathematics, because I realise that the great stumbling block between religious thinkers who love the Quran type people and scientific types who love Darwin and counting genetic codes, is the mathematicization of knowledge that is represented by the scientific revolution since Newton and Galileo. But so what I've done in my book on religious mathematics is to argue that maths is supposed to be actually a branch of religious knowledge. If we go back to the source, if we look at Pythagoras, the great Indian mathematicians, the great Muslim mathematicians, if we trace back mathematics, we find that it is a kind of what one of my friends calls an extreme sport. It's a sort of rarefied way of looking at reality that is a kind of extreme sport, and it's a tracking of the divine signs, because numbers are also signs, and it's those signs that help create and build and sustain life and the world. So, a couple of quotes. I'm nearly finished. I want to quote a couple of things here. I want to quote from Zoroaster, who doesn't get quoted enough, in my opinion. He was a great prophet, a great seer, lived around the time of Abraham, 1700 BC, in Balkh, in what is now Afghanistan, and over into Persia. His gathas are very important. They're hymns that have come down. And if I live long enough, I'm going to do a detailed commentary on them, just as much as I've done on the Quran. So here's a quote from this, the fourth gatha. Gathas means songs. These were like invocations that Zoroaster gave, and they're beautiful. They're written in Avesta, which is a very old form of Indo-European language akin to Vedic. Lord, one who listens and realizes the truth, becomes a life-healing, wise person. He controls his tongue to express the right words when he wills. He, O wise one, through your radiant light, proves good to both parties. So that's verse 19 from Song 4. Ahunavaiti Gatha. And I think it's very beautiful, summing up what our duty is as intellectuals is to listen to the absolute, in whatever context you're found, in whatever culture you live, in whatever religious path you walk. Listen, realize the truth, and become a life-healing, wise person. What more could we ask for? Control your tongue, and then when you have to speak, the right words will come. And if you can do all that, you can channel the ultimate, Ahura Mazda, the wise Lord. And that radiant light, which will flow through you, will heal conflicts, will prove good to both parties. Around the world, so many people are in conflict. It's shocking, Well, those among us who are awake, who are philosophers on duty, who are intellectuals, we should be channeling the divine light which heals these conflicts. And that's why I trained as a mediator years ago. It's why I run the only multi-faith mediation service currently operating on the planet. And there are so many conflicts that involve these egos in jostling for position. Calm them down, sit them down, read them my commentary on the Quran or Zoroaster, and let that radiant light prove good to both parties. You see, my view of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is that that's an example. If we can only get them to sit down, listen to each other, and listen to the absolute, above and beyond their current understandings of the God force. God is not a tribal God. God isn't even restricted to any one religion. God is the absolute beyond all the religious boundaries. God is the water that overspills all the dikes and the canals. The religions are just canal systems to operate the water and make it grow crops in my fields. Yeah, but the water is water, it's Supreme Lord. And as Thales said. So, yeah, that's the route to peace. And that's why we're celebrating with the Druids tonight, the Midsummer Solstice. Right, I think it's time for my final poem. I'm going to share one poem, and I was going to get ready for the Summer Solstice Festival. This poem is number 651 in my collected works. This is from 2011. It's called Where I've Been. And I dedicate this poem to my parents, my mother and father, who taught me to love poetry. Not just Shakespeare, but Rilke, and they had a wonderful library, my parents, growing up in Brighton, of classics of world literature, and poetry was, they had like all the great poets, and it was just to die for as I discovered them all. Okay, 651, Where I've Been. Where I've been, I've taken love. Each field of view, each street, she's been there beside me, invisible, my guide. Where love's been, I've tagged along as she tugged the leash of this poet bard, recounting all her miracles town crier to the muse, her magnanimity that marshals art for peace. Where love is, in the end, you'll find me, fin. In whichever world or plane or place, I'll be there. Poet to the queen of night, bard to the king of light. I'll count the stars out one by one, with verses honouring all their meanings to discerning eyes. I'll drown in deeper knowing's liquor from the inner spring of light, ensourced in dark. My song knows that love's form is void, and that's the magic charge where all embracement of time's God and space's goddess interweaves. Of that I'll sing, some puck or cherub, or a tiny eros going twixt and fro, not telling tales, rhymes merely, that do not rhyme, but rhythm so.